Our guest this week from Pakistan is Lieutenant General Talat Masood, a retired army general and a well-known voice from Pakistan. He will analyze the changing public mood in Pakistan with respect to its army and the fate of General Musharraff. He will be joining us from Islamabad. And later in the show, to answer questions on the political situation in Nepal and its relevance to India, we will be joined by Mr. Jayant Prasad, a career diplomat and the former Indian ambassador to Kathmandu. He will be joining us from New Delhi. For the first time ever in Pakistan, a former army chief and later its president, General Musharraff, could soon face charges of treason as the Nawaz Sharif government in Pakistan attempts to rewrite the rules of civil-military relations in a country where the army is still a very powerful entity and their word is often unchallenged.
Once, Nawaz Sharif was Prime Minister and Pervez Musharraff was General. Then 14 years ago came the coup and Sharif was ousted. Now all these years later, Sharif is Prime Minister and Musharraff, once dictator of Pakistan, is on trial for treason and at the mercy of the Sharif government.
हुकूमत पाकिस्तान ने जनरल परवेज मुशर्रफ के खिलाफ आर्टिकल 6 के तहत कार्रवाई कल सुबह आगाज हो रहा है.
Musharraff returned to Pakistan in March 2013 after years of self-imposed exile, imagining Pakistani voters would make him Prime Minister. Instead, he was banned from politics for life and charged in several criminal cases. Now, if he's found guilty of treason, there could be a death penalty.
It was Pervez Musharraff who badly damaged the image of armed forces. Moreover, I think since the politicians and religious leaders have learnt a lesson, army is also going to review, and it has reviewed, its policies.
Musharraff says he cannot be held responsible for events leading to the emergency in Pakistan in November 2007, and that the Supreme Court will have to summon hundreds of people, from governors to corps commanders who were involved. He says this is a vicious attempt by the Pakistani government to undermine the country's military.
I feel that he will get a clean chit. He will be dry clean of all the dirt which people wanted to throw on him, and he will emerge as a democratic leader, and his credentials as a Democrat have gone very high because he has submitted himself to the majesty of law and to the rule of law.
Adopts a positive approach.
Pakistan has been ruled by the army for over 3 decades, about half its existence, but no ruler or top military commander has ever faced criminal prosecution until Musharraff's return from exile in April. Many in the Pakistani government say Musharraff's trial is only to set a precedent about the supremacy of law over any individual and is not about political vendetta against the former dictator. Others say the government is only trying to divert attention from the real threats Pakistan faces.
Nawaz Sharif and army seem to be engaged in some kind of a power tussle in which Nawaz Sharif wants to come out on the top, and hence this last minute thing. Otherwise all the courts had exempted him and given him bail so that he could go to Dubai as he wanted. But just before he was to go, there was this fresh charge which the government decided to impose on him. It was always, all along, talked about, but it seemed that government had been hesitating to press this charge.
This is the first time that a civilian institution has challenged a military dictator, one who ruled with an iron hand for nearly a decade in Pakistan. The question is, will it set the course for Pakistan to evolve as a progressive and democratic state in the years to come?
Opinion is still divided on the extent to which Pakistan's civilian government can go to punish a military leader for subverting their constitution. And our guest on this show, Lieutenant General Talat Masood, is a retired 3-star general of the Pakistan Army, and he will examine the evolving nature of civil-military relations in Pakistan. General Masood, my first question is, what would you regard as General Musharraf's biggest mistake, his misadventure in Kargil that led to his tiff with Nawaz Sharif and the coup, or his return to Pakistan?
Well, I would say that there have been many mistakes on the part of Musharraf, although he has done some good things as well. But obviously, one of the major blunders that he made was Kargil, for which I think he himself acknowledges that, although he doesn't say that in public. And that resulted in Pakistan suffering a lot and being humiliated and unnecessarily gave a huge advantage to India. And also the Kashmir cause suffered as a consequence. So I think in many ways Kargil was a great blunder.
Why is it that General Musharraf is being blamed for treason and not the earlier military rulers of Pakistan? What has changed in the civil-military equation of Pakistan now?
Well, they think that probably the civilian leaders, most of them either they are dead, they are not alive, and at the same time it becomes extremely difficult and problematic to dig up past cases, and then what would they achieve by it? But they think the civilian government, and I think rightly thinks that you know, there is a time when you have to sort of take on the military in that sense, that they can't continue to undermine democracy and go unpunished. So I think this is the resolve that they had, even as a part of an electoral promise, and I think they are trying to fulfill that. But at the same time, they have to be very careful that they don't give an impression of showing vendetta or any personal vengeance. It should be much more broad-based and not selective in prosecution.
It was said that General Musharraf had the backing of the powerful army, as General Kiani was his hand-picked man. But with General Kiani due to retire now, isn't the timing of the trial now too much of a coincidence?
No, I think the timing is also related to the fact that there are other problems from which this government may be wanting to deflect attention. Because I think the timing is not appropriate, for the simple reason that the military is undergoing a lot of challenges. And I think bringing about this will also psychologically, if not politically, burden the military in many ways, which could have been avoided. A more suitable or an opportune moment should have been found, especially when the government was far more confident and had already shown a certain level of performance. Then it would have been better to sort of undertake this case and not only do a selective sort of prosecution of Musharraf, but also bring all those others who are also responsible for supporting him in the coup, or were even directly or indirectly responsible, to bring them also to justice. I think that would have been a more fairer way of handling this case.
Is the trial of General Musharraf aimed at punishing him for all that he's blamed for, or is it to convey a strong message to a future coup leader in Pakistan?
Well, Mr. Raza, I think it works both ways. In a way, it also punishes, if at all he's convicted, General Musharraf, then of course the message would be there. But at the same time, the message is also to the army and also to the civilian population that now, we are sufficiently secure and we feel confident that we can take on the army, and do not now rely on the army. It is the political forces that are going to now remain in control and will run the affairs of the country, and there is no question of a reversion to the army.
Clearly, the times have changed in Pakistan, and it seems that GHQ Rawalpindi will now go along with the public mood, as they had done in previous attempts when they were invited by the people to take over the country. Coming up next on Latitude, despite a record voter turnout, even as the Maoists allege rigging, there is still little optimism on whether the elections itself can address Nepal's biggest challenge of framing a constitution. Welcome back. With Nepal's Maoists alleging irregularities in an election with a record voter turnout, Nepal's transition to a democracy has run into rough weather even before a new constituent assembly could hope to do what its predecessors had failed to do.
India watched closely as neighboring Nepal conducted what could be historic national elections. The country had thrown out its monarch several years ago, but hasn't been able to find a stable government since. The prevalent political parties could not agree on what kind of government was needed in 2008, and since then, Nepal has had 5 governments. The economy is flagging and poverty and militancy is rising. And the national election this week to elect a 601-member Constituent Assembly was perhaps a final chance before Nepal becomes a haven for terrorists and chaos.
कालीन चुनौतीका बीच सम्पन्न आजको निर्वाचन स्वतन्त्र र निष्पक्ष रूपमा सम्पन्न भएको जानकारी गराउन पाउँदा मलाई हर्ष र गौरव लागेको छ.
From the Indian point of view, an indecisive verdict could mean instability in the friendly country, where the Chinese could play an increasingly bigger role. The aftermath of the elections isn't promising either. The Maoists, one of the 3 big parties along with the Nepali Congress and the unified Marxist-Leninist Party, have decided not to accept the outcome of the poll. And this after reports indicated that its leader Prachanda was losing.
अब हामीले त प्रश्न भन्यौं यो सबै चीजहरुको पुनरावलोकन गरेर मात्रै अर्को कदम चालियोस्. अब निर्वाचन आयोगले रोकेन, अन्य दलले रोकेनन् भने हामी यो प्रक्रियाबाट अलग हुन्छौं. यो प्रक्रियामा हामी रहदैनौं. अलग भनेको के हो? हामी संविधान सभामा हुँदैनौं.
This is a worry sign for India, which helped to conduct the polls, an unclear mandate and also a spurt in violence. 30 people have been injured in the aftermath. India is worried because Nepal is the route through which fake currency comes in, as do terrorists and Maoist guerrillas. Moreover, there is always the growing influence of China.
It is quite clear in terms of what China is up to in Nepal, that it is part of this aggressive posture that is behind their statements on Japan, on the South China Sea, and on various important Asian and international issues. Having said that, they have now increased their involvement and engagement in Nepal. There's no doubt about that.
A failure to form a stable government in Nepal could disappoint India, which has been pushing for the new democratic order to become effective. Thus, New Delhi will be watching closely as the political landscape changes yet again in Kathmandu.
Unless Nepal can make the most of these elections, the optimism of its voters could soon turn to bitterness and undo the gains of the recent past. And joining us on the show is the former Indian ambassador to Nepal, Mr. Jayant Prasad. Mr. Prasad, my first question. Even though these elections in Nepal are being seen as an assertion of Nepalese sovereign rights, but the absence of political clarity and the multiplicity of political parties could perhaps lead to the same state of affairs as was with the previous Constituent Assembly, which failed to do anything. Or could it be any different now?
Maruf, you are right in suggesting that there is a fragmentation of the Nepalese political parties, which is very disquieting. But look at the positive side. The positive side is that many different streams of opinion are represented this time in the Constituent Assembly. I dare say a little bit more than the previous Constituent Assembly. And it represents the broadest spectrum of views. And the second is that having failed the first time round in having a constitution at the end of 4 years of the CA, this time the political leadership cannot afford to fail. Otherwise, this system that they are trying to create of multi-party democracy will be discredited.
The previous elections had brought the Maoists of Nepal back into the political fold and led them to shed violence. But with their now denouncing the election process, is it possible that Nepal could now slide back into violence if things don't work the way the Maoists want them to work?
Well, there is a little bit of danger of that happening, Maruf. But our hope and expectation is that it won't, because Pushp Kamal Dahal Prachand came out with a statement Thursday morning where he decried the election process, alleged that there was widespread rigging, but kept the line of communication open by saying that he would abide by the past commitments made by the Maoist party to join the mainstream and to keep wedded to multi-party democracy. That's a good sign.
The international community, especially India, has welcomed the elections and the large turnout. But how do you see India's fortune shaping up after these elections?
Maruf, India has no special axe to grind in Nepal other than to seek Nepal's progress and prosperity. But for that, they must have a constitution. And for having the constitution, the election of a new CA was imperative. Every time there has been political change in Nepal, India has stood solidly behind the Nepalese people, whether it was the change from the Rana autocracy to the monarchy in 1950, or the change to constitutional monarchy in 1990-91, or the aftermath of the Jan Andolan of 2006, when Nepal declared itself to be a republic. India has always stood behind the Nepali people, and there is a good chance that if Nepal stabilizes, then Nepal's enormous natural resources can be a source of wealth for the Nepalese people and can be a source of energy for India and the rest of the subcontinent.
There is apparently a certain degree of resentment amongst the Nepalese on the clout that India enjoys in Kathmandu. Why is that so? And is India doing enough to counter China's growing influence in Nepal?
You know, one of the reasons why there is resentment is that the interaction of the Nepalese is so overwhelmingly with India. They have a resident population in Nepal today of 27 million people. But as you would very well know, 6 to 7 million Nepalese live and work in India, and they are treated on par with Indian citizens. We look at Nepal's exports, for example. 71% of their exports are destined to India and less than 2% to China. So despite all the hype about increasing Chinese and Nepalese growing ties, which they should grow because China is the other important neighbor of Nepal, there is a degree of obsession of the Nepalese media with India, which is unavoidable. And as the relationship, as Nepal becomes more prosperous and Nepal gets more stabilized, the relationship is bound to improve. Incidentally, at this point of time, India and China desire the same outcomes in Nepal. We both want stability there. We both want progress there. And the Nepalese leadership is well aware of it. The Chinese leaders, when they visit Nepal in private and public, say this.
India clearly has a number of advantages in Nepal. But the big question is, till how long can India continue to maintain those advantages in Nepal against the growing influence of the Chinese all around India, as we've seen in other neighboring countries of India as well? That's all in this episode of Latitude. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, thank you for being with us, and goodbye.